All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about the secret threads that connect our most essential resources, our water, our energy, our food. And we're going to look at an incredible tool that helps us actually see that web so we can build a much smarter and more sustainable future. So let me start with a question for you. What does your morning coffee have to do with the power grid? I know it sounds kind of like a trick question, right? But it's not. The answer actually pulls back the curtain on this incredibly complex system of connections that we almost never stop to think about. Stick with me, and you'll see just how deep those connections really go. Before we can even think about managing our resources better, we first have to understand them. And that means we have to see all the surprising ways the water we drink, the energy we use, and the food we eat are all tangled up together. It all starts with a few really simple but powerful ideas. Okay, here's the first link in the chain. It takes water to make energy. Just think about hydropower, right? Water spinning massive turbines. Or think about all the water needed to cool down traditional power plants. It's simple. No water, no power. And of course, it works the other way around too. The water in our homes doesn't just magically appear at the tap. We need a ton of energy to pump it from rivers and aquifers, to treat it so it's safe to drink, and to move it all the way to our cities and towns. And that brings us to the third piece of this giant puzzle: food. Agriculture is just incredibly thirsty for both water and energy. From irrigation for crops to the fuel for farm equipment, you just can't have our food system without the other two. This whole interconnected system, that's what experts call the water-energy-food nexus. And here you can see some real-world examples of this nexus in action. You've got water for cooling power plants, you've got energy for desalinating ocean water to make it drinkable, and both of them feeding into everything from running farm machinery to processing the food that ends up on our plates. It's this big, continuous loop where everything depends on everything else. And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. For decades, we've managed all of these things in their own little boxes, their own silos. You had the water people over here and the energy people over there. But that kind of thinking is dangerous because a decision in one sector can accidentally create a massive crisis in another, and nobody even sees it coming until it's way too late. So, if that old way of looking at things is broken, what's the fix? How do we start to see the entire picture all at once? Well, that's where a whole new kind of tool comes into play. Let me introduce you to Q-Nexus. It's a piece of software built to do one thing and do it incredibly well. Take that messy, tangled web of connections we've been talking about and make it clear, measurable, and, well, understandable. So what is it exactly? At its core, Q-Nexus is a really powerful modeling tool. It uses a tried-and-true method called input-output analysis to basically draw a detailed map of our resource economy. It figures out precisely how much of one resource, like water, is needed to produce another, like a kilowatt of electricity. It's all about turning those fuzzy connections into cold, hard numbers. And this is why it's such a game changer. It gives you a holistic analysis, meaning it doesn't just look at the obvious connections, but all the hidden, indirect ones too. It lets planners test out different what-if scenarios, letting them essentially test drive the future to see what happens before they make a big policy decision. And what's really cool is that it's super flexible. You can adapt it to model pretty much any system you can think of. Okay, so how does this thing actually work? We're not going to get lost in the super technical weeds here, don't worry. But let's just walk through the basic idea, the 3 simple steps you take to model an entire resource system.
Really, it all boils down to this logical 3-step process. First, you tell it what pieces are in your puzzle. Second, you teach the model how all those pieces connect to each other. And third, you start asking it some really interesting questions about the future.
So step 1 is just setting up your building blocks. You have to tell the system what you're actually analyzing. Is it just the classic water, energy, and food? Or maybe you want to add the economy into the mix, or land use. You get to define the big players that make up your system. All right, step 2 is where you feed it the data. This is where you define what are called resource intensities. Think of it like a recipe for everything in your system. You might tell the model exactly how many gallons of water it takes to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity from a coal plant versus how much it takes from a solar farm. This is what gives the model its intelligence. And then, finally, step 3, you build your scenarios. You always start with what's called a baseline scenario. That's basically a snapshot of the world as it is right now, business as usual. Then you create your alternative scenarios. This is where you get to ask all your big what-if questions about the future. And this is where the magic really happens. Once you've built the model, You can use it to peek into different possible futures and directly compare the different paths that a city or a country could take.
Let's pose a real question. A huge goal for pretty much everyone right now is shifting to renewable energy. Sounds great, right? Good for the climate. But what does a massive shift towards solar and wind actually mean for our other resources? Like, specifically, how does that affect our total demand for water?
With a tool like Q-Nexus, the answer is laid out right in front of you, crystal clear. You're looking at a comparison screen. On one side, you've got your business as usual baseline. On the other, your new renewable transition scenario. And you can immediately see the trade-offs. You might find that your plan dramatically cuts carbon emissions. Awesome. But you might also discover it increases the demand for some rare mineral by 300%. That's the kind of critical insight you need to make smart choices. So, okay, it's obviously a powerful tool for scientists and city planners. But what does it really mean for the rest of us? Why is seeing the world this way so incredibly important, especially right now?
Well, it matters because this isn't just some academic exercise. This kind of analysis is being used to make hugely important decisions about our collective future. It's helping us build cities that are more resilient to climate change, design energy transitions that don't accidentally cause a water crisis, and figure out the smartest ways to conserve our most precious resources.
When you boil it all down, the crucial point is this. Tools like Q-Nexus represent a fundamental shift in how we make decisions. We're finally starting to move away from guesswork and making massive policy choices based on incomplete data. We're moving toward a future where our plans are based on a clear-eyed, holistic understanding of how our world actually works.
And that really just leaves us with one final big question. This kind of technology gives us an incredible gift, the ability to see the consequences of our actions before we take them. The tool can show us the different paths, but at the end of the day, we're the ones who have to decide which one to walk.